There is a force that moves unseen in every interaction, a shadow that creeps into the mind, eroding judgment and twisting intention. It is the presence of the toxic, those who wield deceit, resentment, or envy as weapons, who cloak weakness in charm and kindness in manipulation. To confront them is not a matter of sentiment, but of calculation. You must first recognize that their power is only what you allow it to be, and their influence only endures while you submit to it. Guard your perception, for the first betrayal occurs not in their actions, but in your tolerance of their poison. Law 1. Observe without attachment. Toxic people thrive on reaction. They feed on the tremor in your voice, the hesitation in your step, the flicker of doubt in your gaze. Do not respond as though they are storms to be weathered. Instead, watch with the precision of a commander surveying a battlefield. Let every word, every gesture, be measured against the ledger of their intent. When you see the patterns, the lies, the provocations, the subtle undermining, you are no longer their victim. You are their strategist. Law 2. Do not expose your vulnerabilities. The moment a toxic soul glimpses the fault line of your confidence, they strike. They are predators of the weak and opportunists of the insecure. Conceal your fears, disguise your desires, and never speak the truths that can be turned against you. Invisibility is armor. Silence is ammunition. Let them underestimate you. Let them misjudge the depth of your patience, for in that misjudgment lies your power to act without resistance. Law 3. Control the narrative. Toxic people thrive in chaos, in the confusion of perception. They bend reality, spin rumor, and rearrange fact until you question even your own eyes. Do not fight them in the arena they choose. Seize the stage for yourself. Speak sparingly. Act deliberately. Let your presence define the story, rather than reacting to their distortions. History is always written by those who remain calm in the storm, and perception is the battlefield on which loyalty and fear are forged. Law 4. Set boundaries with the precision of a fortress wall. Toxicity cannot be negotiated with morality or reason. It is an infection, and proximity determines its potency. Decide what will touch you and what will be kept at a distance. Let your boundaries be absolute, unassailable, and enforce them without hesitation. In their frustration, they may test these limits, but a ruler who hesitates invites insurrection. Consistency is the silent terror that teaches respect, and fear of consequence is the law that sustains order. Law 5. Exploit their patterns strategically. Every toxic person is predictable, constrained by the compulsions that drive them. Study their methods, anticipate their maneuvers, and turn their own devices against them. Do not seek to change them. The currents of their nature are too strong, but harness the energy of their toxicity, redirect it in ways that serve your purpose. Mastery is not cruelty. It is the orchestration of circumstance, the alignment of chaos with deliberate intent. Law 6. Withdraw gracefully, not with wrath. Engagement on their terms is surrender. Confrontation is fruitless when it feeds their appetite. Exit situations with composure, leaving no emotional residue to be harvested. Detachment is your weapon, patience your shield. When you withdraw, it is not defeat. It is a strategic repositioning, an unseen advance toward long-term advantage. Let absence illuminate their dependence, and let time reveal the futility of their scheme. Law 7. Transform fear and respect into leverage. Toxicity respects strength, admires control, and flees from uncertainty. Do not seek to punish, do not seek to shame, do not appeal to their conscience. Instead, embody authority in every action, demonstrate clarity in every choice, and cultivate an aura that is impenetrable and inexorable. Their reactions, whether envy, submission, or retreat, become tools you wield. Fear is not cruelty. Respect is not generosity. They are the currency of influence, and those who master it dictate the terms of every encounter. To survive among the toxic is to navigate a landscape of constant deception, emotional manipulation, and subtle aggression. You will encounter smiles that conceal daggers, advice that carries chains, and words that charm while they wound. Know this: you are not alone in recognizing these dangers, but you are rare in your capacity to act with clarity and calm. Your mind, disciplined and unswayed, becomes the arena in which they are contained. Your choices, deliberate and unflinching, become the instruments of their containment. Every interaction with toxicity is a battle, but it need not be a war. The laws are not vengeance, they are architecture. They are the structure by which you preserve your power, your mind, your peace. To engage the toxic without these measures is to invite erosion, to surrender territory that is yours by right of discernment and self-possession. To internalize these laws is to walk through fire unscathed, to emerge with command intact, and to leave the manipulators standing among the ruins of their own design. It is not enough to see the toxic. You must see yourself, your patience, your thresholds, your capacity for calculated action. The world offers no shelter from human cunning, no immunity from the ambitions that twist morality into weaponry. Only the observant, the detached, the deliberate, survive and transform confrontation into mastery. Let this be your counsel. Recognize the currents, fortify your vessel, and navigate with unflinching resolve. In the theater of human ambition, the toxic play their part, but it is you who writes the final act. The lesson of toxicity is not delivered once. It repeats, deepens, and weaves itself into the marrow of understanding. Observe again the patterns, the subtle orchestrations that underlie every encounter. The toxic cannot help but reveal themselves through repetition, through the insistence of their methods, through the compulsions they cannot restrain. Every insult disguised as advice, every veiled threat, every attempt to fracture your confidence is a thread in a larger design, and the discerning mind sees the pattern as a map rather than a maze. Awareness is not passive. It is a weapon honed by repetition, sharpened by reflection. Do not mistake patience for weakness. In the stillness of observation, power accumulates quietly, like water filling a reservoir unseen beneath the surface. The toxic act swiftly, reactively, but the measured strategist moves according to the architecture of circumstance. One learns to anticipate not only words but the silences, the pauses that contain intent. One learns to read gestures as one reads terrain, and moods as one reads weather. Every fluctuation carries meaning, and every pattern can be exploited or avoided. In this, detachment is not apathy, it is command. Boundaries must be reinforced continuously. To allow one breach is to invite many. The toxic test endlessly, probing for hesitation, for cracks in authority, for traces of doubt. And yet, firmness need not be harshness. Firmness is a principle, a visible perimeter that communicates consequence without chaos. The walls you construct are not prisons but shields, protecting the mind and the will from erosion. The toxic may rail at the barriers, question their necessity, or seek ways around them. But the unyielding strategist knows that control of the threshold determines mastery over the encounter. One must cultivate the ability to use the toxic as instruments without becoming their victim. Their impulses, when predicted and understood, can be harnessed. When a toxic colleague seeks to undermine, let their effort be channeled into exposing their own methods. When envy or spite surfaces, allow it to illuminate weaknesses only they perceive, to reveal themselves without your interference. The art is not revenge, it is orchestration. To bend chaos toward order, to redirect disruption into revelation, to maintain advantage while they exhaust themselves, this is the quiet triumph of mastery. Withdrawal is not surrender, but strategy. Toxicity craves engagement, for it cannot endure indifference. To exit gracefully is to place the weight of absence upon them, to let their need for confrontation be met with the calm of disengagement. The mind that knows when to act and when to retreat is invulnerable. Timing is the currency of influence, and patience is the coin that buys leverage where others see only conflict. In the gaps between presence and absence, the toxic reveal the extent of their dependence and the futility of their scheme. The final law is the embodiment of authority itself. The toxic respond not to morality, not to plea, not to logic, but to command that emanates from certainty. Strength without cruelty, clarity without aggression, presence without entanglement, these are the signals that cannot be ignored. In every gesture, every choice, every carefully weighed interaction, the toxic measure and recalibrate. The strategist allows their behavior to inform, but never dictate, the course of action. They may attempt manipulation, feigned charm, or veiled threat. Yet the ruler of their engagement remains unshaken, their will unbreached, their focus impenetrable. In this, self-awareness is paramount. Toxicity is not only in the other, it exists in moments of hesitation, in misjudged leniency, in the failure to recognize the currents of influence. To master the toxic is to master the self, to discern what provokes reaction, to know the limits of patience, to calibrate engagement with precision, to measure every word against consequence. Only through relentless observation, disciplined detachment, and calculated action does one convert threat into leverage, chaos into opportunity, manipulation into insight. Power in these encounters is not about triumph in the moment. It is the quiet accumulation of advantage, the preservation of clarity, the prevention of erosion. Toxicity is a battlefield where victories are often invisible, where the absence of compromise is itself the mark of mastery. To engage with the toxic is to confront the architecture of human cunning, to navigate currents that are rarely visible to the untrained eye, to walk a path where instinct, calculation, and self-possession converge. The toxic reveal the fragility of those unprepared. They illuminate the strength of those disciplined. In every smile that conceals a dagger, every word that hides a chain, every gesture that disguises intent, the strategist perceives opportunity, safeguards boundaries, and maintains the command of their own mind. This is not cruelty. This is not moral triumph. It is recognition of the terrain of human interaction and the deliberate mastery of circumstance that determines who remains whole, who controls the stage, and who is left untouched amid the chaos they themselves create. The mastery of dealing with the toxic is neither sudden nor flashy. It is cumulative, deliberate, and unrelenting. Each encounter is a rehearsal, each slight a lesson, each manipulation a mirror that reflects not just the character of the other, but the limits and strengths of your own. You learn to perceive the currents before they surface, to hear the hidden tremors beneath polite words, to feel the subtle vibrations of intention before they manifest in action. In this realm, patience is a weapon sharper than any blade, and silence a shield stronger than any fortress. Every toxic presence is defined by predictability. Every envy, every manipulation, every false kindness follows a rhythm that cannot be fully concealed. Recognize it, map it, anticipate it, for in the repetition lies the key to control. When you understand the patterns, the toxic become instruments, not masters. Their energy, once directed toward chaos, can be turned to illuminate truth, to reveal weakness in their own design, to provide insight into the vulnerabilities they exploit in others. Do not be seduced by the drama of their theatrics. Instead, treat each act as a move on the board, a gesture that can be leveraged, contained, or neutralized. Disengagement is as much strategy as engagement. The toxic are addicted to response. They hunger for reaction. Your withdrawal is a demonstration of command, a refusal to validate their compulsion, a quiet assertion of autonomy. When you step back, you do not relinquish influence. You preserve it. You allow the toxic to exhaust themselves in pursuit of engagement that never comes, and in their absence, you reclaim the ground they sought to corrode. Time becomes an ally. For every moment they miscalculate, every misstep they make, accrues advantage to your position. Boundaries are not suggestions. They are laws of survival. They are the invisible lines that the toxic dare not cross without consequence. Enforce them consistently, without hesitation, without moral entanglement. Let your firmness communicate inevitability. Those who seek to manipulate or harm will test these limits. But to yield even once is to invite erosion. To maintain clarity, to safeguard presence, to ensure freedom from coercion, these lines must be absolute. Respect from the toxic is born not of kindness, but of recognition that transgression carries certainty of consequence. Leverage is derived from observation and self-possession. The toxic feed on uncertainty, hesitation, and doubt. By cultivating composure, you convert fear into respect, chaos into clarity. Your authority becomes self-evident, your decisions unassailable, your demeanor a continuous demonstration that you are the arbiter of interaction, not the victim of circumstance. In every measured word, every deliberate gesture, every calculated silence, the toxic recognize the futility of their attempts. Influence is not seized through confrontation, but through the quiet demonstration of unbroken control. Emotional detachment is the scaffold upon which mastery is built. Allow neither resentment nor frustration to dictate action. Every impulse to react is a potential vulnerability. Maintain calm. Observe keenly. Act with deliberation. Toxicity seeks to ignite fire in others because it cannot endure self-possession. The moment you refuse to burn, you become unassailable. The battlefield of human manipulation is not won through force or aggression, but through the disciplined orchestration of thought and action. Your mind, disciplined and unshakable, becomes the arena in which their schemes collapse upon themselves. Self-awareness is both shield and sword. Understand your own thresholds, recognize the provocations designed to pierce them, and adjust with precision. Mastery over the toxic requires mastery over the self. Restraint, foresight, and the capacity to act without emotional compromise. Each decision is weighed, each engagement measured, each withdrawal deliberate. To fail here is to surrender to chaos. To succeed is to convert every challenge into an instrument of advantage, every provocation into an opportunity to demonstrate unwavering command. In the end, dealing with toxic people is a lesson in architecture, the architecture of influence, of self-preservation, of control. You are constructing structures unseen, fortifying positions unassailable, navigating currents invisible to the casual observer. Every interaction, every calculated pause, every act of restraint builds a framework that protects your mind, your purpose, and your autonomy. The toxic are inevitable in human affairs, but submission is optional. Power, clarity, and self-possession are cultivated, not given, and in this cultivation lies freedom. The toxic may attempt to sway, to undermine, to destabilize, but they cannot invade a mind fortified by discipline, honed by observation, and guided by relentless calculation. Your presence, deliberate and impenetrable, becomes the boundary against which their schemes shatter. Their venom is neutralized not through confrontation, but through the unyielding precision of self-mastery, the quiet demonstration of authority, and the resolute refusal to participate in the chaos they cultivate. You do not fight them. You endure, you observe, you control, and in doing so, you emerge untouched, unshaken, and sovereign. The theater of human interaction is populated with those who seek advantage, with those who wield duplicity as a tool. To navigate it successfully is to recognize the patterns, to establish absolute boundaries, to withdraw strategically, and to wield authority with quiet, unassailable precision. Toxicity is a constant. Mastery over it is a discipline. It demands vigilance, patience, and the courage to act with clarity when others are ensnared by reaction. It demands an understanding that the mind is the ultimate terrain, and those who hold command of it dictate the flow of influence and the outcomes of engagement. Every toxic encounter is also a mirror into human instinct, revealing the hunger for control, the compulsion to dominate, and the strategies of self-preservation in those who seek to unsettle you. Consider the colleague who cloaks critique in praise, offering advice that is intentionally laced with ambiguity to provoke uncertainty. One recognizes the pattern and reframes it. The criticism becomes a source of insight rather than distraction, the praise a mask to be examined rather than accepted. By treating each act as data, each maneuver as information, you convert confusion into clarity. There is the friend who thrives on emotional leverage, who gauges loyalty by the pressure they can exert on your conscience. They attempt to guilt, to obligate, to make your decisions their own. Yet in acknowledging the mechanism, you strip it of power. You act decisively, with awareness of the intended manipulation, and you allow your choices to remain uncoerced, unmoved by the emotional performance staged before you. Their attempts to fracture intention become irrelevant when the mind remains sovereign. Some toxicity manifests through passive aggression, the unspoken jab, the subtle exclusion, the quiet undermining. Recognize that these are not random acts, but calibrated moves, and respond with precision. Do not escalate. Do not apologize unnecessarily. Do not seek approval. Instead, document, observe, and let consequences follow naturally. The passive aggressor is most dangerous when met with confusion or overreaction. By maintaining composure and clarity, you reveal the futility of their tactics and reduce their influence to emptiness. Consider the manipulator in social arenas, who spreads rumor to fragment alliances or misdirect attention. Their weapon is perception, and yet perception can be reclaimed. Control what is known, what is shared, and what is allowed to influence others. Counteract deception not with lies, but with deliberate transparency, where it serves your purpose, and discretion where it protects your strategy. The manipulator loses power when the environment no longer bends to their narrative. There is the opportunist who thrives on your absence, waiting for missteps to exploit, waiting for openings to assert dominance. Anticipate these openings and fill them before they appear. Preemptive action is not aggression, it is maintenance of control. By occupying space with purpose, by asserting influence where vacuums would form, you deprive the toxic of the leverage they seek. Their schemes collapse in the face of calculated presence. Some toxicity arises from envy, a corrosive force that seeks to diminish achievements or undermine credibility. Recognize envy as a reflection of scarcity, not of truth. Shield accomplishments from unnecessary scrutiny, but never conceal competence entirely, for weakness invites intrusion. Present capability as inevitability, not as challenge. Allow your success to exist as a constant, unthreatened by attempts to manipulate perception. Envy loses its potency when met with quiet, unquestionable authority. Then there are those who attempt to seduce or charm with ulterior motives, drawing you into transactions that favor them while depleting you. Analyze every act of affection or cooperation for intent. Let engagement be contingent upon mutual advantage, and disengage gracefully when the scales tip against your interest. Do not react to flattery or theatrics. Instead, evaluate utility and act with discretion. Charm is a tool for them, for you, and it must be wielded with awareness. Even betrayal, when it appears, must be approached with calculated observation. The traitor tests limits, seeks gaps, and manipulates trust. Respond not with wrath, but with strategic recognition. Allow the betrayal to reveal the boundaries of loyalty and the true structure of alliances. In studying it, one gains foresight and prepares for future engagements with precision. The act that might destabilize the unwary becomes, for the strategist, a source of knowledge and opportunity. Every toxic figure encountered provides a scenario in which mastery is exercised, boundaries are defined, and strategy is refined. Observation, patience, and measured action convert potential chaos into predictable dynamics. By understanding the mechanics of manipulation, by anticipating the compulsions that drive interference, and by responding with unwavering clarity, you maintain command over your environment. They operate within the architecture of human instinct. You operate with the architecture of deliberate intent. The modern landscape of influence is strewn with subtle toxins: the passive aggressor, the manipulator, the envious, the opportunist, the betrayer, the charming deceiver. Each moves according to the laws of self-interest, but mastery arises in recognizing the rules of engagement and acting in accordance with strategy rather than emotion. Command is preserved not through domination, but through disciplined perception, precise reaction, and consistent enforcement of boundaries. The toxic exist to test the limits of authority, and through deliberate, unflinching awareness, one transforms every test into reinforcement, every challenge into consolidation, every attempt at control into evidence of your own. The first step in mastering interaction with toxicity is recognition without judgment. One cannot act strategically if the presence of manipulation is denied or softened by sentiment. The toxic are defined by their effect on the mind, by the way they distort attention, redirect intention, and fracture clarity. Observation is not merely seeing, it is perceiving the subtle architecture of influence, the invisible currents that shape choices and reactions. In understanding these currents, the strategist positions themselves not as responder, but as conductor of the flow, guiding interaction according to principle rather than impulse. Control begins within. The mind that is disciplined cannot be occupied or swayed. Every thought, every impulse, every flicker of irritation becomes subject to deliberate scrutiny. In this mastery of the interior, external toxicity loses potency. It is not necessary to confront, to retaliate, or to correct. It is sufficient to remain unshaken, to allow the external agitation to pass through without imprint. Presence, unwavering and composed, becomes a barrier more impervious than any wall, a command more absolute than any decree. Boundaries are the second instrument of power. They must exist prior to engagement, independent of provocation or need. Their imposition is neither negotiation nor appeal. It is statement. To allow flexibility is to invite erosion. To hesitate is to yield ground. Boundaries enforce structure upon the engagement, define the space in which interaction occurs, and make clear that intrusion is neither permitted nor tolerated. In their enforcement lies not vengeance, but order. Detachment is the third principle. Toxicity thrives on entanglement, on the emotional entrapment of those it targets. To remain detached is not to ignore, but to maintain the clarity of perception and the autonomy of action. Detachment permits observation to be precise, judgment to be unclouded, and decisions to be calculated. It converts confrontation into assessment, provocation into insight, and manipulation into opportunity for controlled response. Strategy is the fourth tool. Engagement is not reaction, it is orchestration. Each interaction is assessed for impact, influence, and consequence. Decisions are made according to long-term positioning rather than immediate satisfaction. The toxic act within predictable patterns. The strategist moves according to principles that cannot be provoked, compelled, or subverted. Every gesture, every communication, every allowance is a measure of calculated control, designed to preserve influence while neutralizing disruption. Observation of power dynamics is the fifth law. Toxicity is rarely isolated. It interacts with networks, alliances, and hierarchies. To master its presence is to perceive not only the individual, but the system they inhabit. Awareness of position, influence, and leverage allows one to contain effect without confrontation, to redirect energy without conflict, and to maintain sovereignty over one's own domain, while others act according to predictable compulsions. The sixth principle is the preservation of autonomy. Influence from the toxic is neutralized when the target retains control over intention, choice, and attention. Autonomy is not granted. It is maintained through vigilance, discipline, and the refusal to yield. In every decision, the strategist evaluates the potential for encroachment and ensures that the locus of control remains within, unbreached and unchallenged. The seventh and final law is the internalization of command. Mastery over toxicity is inseparable from mastery over the self. Strength, clarity, and authority are cultivated internally. They manifest externally as influence unassailable, presence impenetrable, and judgment unclouded. The toxic are constrained, not by confrontation, but by the unyielding consistency of principle, the quiet rigor of thought, and the deliberate calibration of action. Control is not won through struggle. It is sustained through awareness, discipline, and the conscious orchestration of interaction. To live within these laws is to transform potential chaos into ordered engagement, to convert manipulation into structure, and to navigate human interaction with precision. Toxicity becomes a landscape to be surveyed, not a battlefield to be stormed, a current to be guided, not a flood to be resisted blindly. The mastery of toxic influence is neither sudden nor dramatic, but cumulative, deliberate, and absolute. Through recognition, internal control, boundaries, detachment, strategic orchestration, perception of dynamics, preservation of autonomy, and internalized command, the toxic lose their power to disturb, disrupt, or dominate. What remains is clarity, sovereignty, and unshakable presence. Every thought, every intention, Every movement must be measured against the architecture of influence. To engage without clarity is to surrender to currents unseen, to react without strategy, and to leave one's own mind vulnerable to intrusion. The toxic operate through patterns repetition, subtle pressure, and the leveraging of expectation. The strategist perceives these patterns as data, as structure, as terrain to be navigated rather than storms to endure. Mastery arises not from resistance alone, but from deliberate alignment of perception, will, and action. Discipline within the mind is the most potent weapon. Every flicker of irritation, every impulse to retaliate, every surge of impatience is an opening to notice without surrendering, to feel without reacting, to acknowledge without yielding. This is the essence of control. The toxic may provoke, insinuate, or unsettle, yet the unshaken mind converts all attempted disturbances into clarity. Presence becomes a force field, composure an unassailable command, observation a means of preemption rather than response. Boundaries, once set, must be enforced consistently. They are not negotiable, not contingent, and not symbolic. They are the line upon which autonomy depends. To bend, even slightly, invites erosion. To hesitate invites encroachment. Boundaries establish the space in which engagement occurs, defining what may touch the strategist and what cannot. Enforcement is neither anger nor cruelty. It is the articulation of principle, the demonstration of unyielding command over one's own environment. Detachment sharpens perception. Toxicity relies on entanglement, on the consumption of attention, on the distortion of focus. By remaining detached, one converts distraction into insight, provocation into information, and manipulation into opportunity. Emotional neutrality does not mean absence of care, but the subordination of impulse to principle. To engage without clarity is to surrender to currents unseen, to react without strategy, and to leave one's own mind vulnerable to intrusion. The toxic operate through patterns repetition, subtle pressure, and the leveraging of expectation. The strategist perceives these patterns as data, as structure, as terrain to be navigated, rather than storms to endure. Mastery arises not from resistance alone, but from deliberate alignment of perception, will, and action. Engagement becomes architecture. Each act reinforces structure. Each silence maintains order, and each decision consolidates control. In this, influence is sustained without confrontation, and disruption is neutralized before it manifests. Observation of networks and dynamics further extends mastery. Toxicity rarely operates alone. It exists within relationships, hierarchies, and interdependencies. Recognizing the forces that surround it allows containment without direct conflict, leverage without struggle, and influence without surrender. One perceives not only the immediate threat, but the broader architecture in which it moves, and acts in accordance with this understanding. Autonomy is preserved through vigilance. Influence is neutralized not by opposition, but by retention of decision-making, attention, and intention. The strategist does not yield the locus of control. Every choice is evaluated for risk of encroachment. Autonomy is continuously reinforced, maintained through disciplined thought and deliberate action. Where the toxic seek to manipulate, the unshakable mind simply does not yield. Internalized command is the culmination of mastery. Authority is cultivated within. Clarity is sustained through disciplined perception. Influence manifests naturally in action. The toxic are constrained not by overt conflict, but by the unyielding consistency of principle and the quiet rigor of self-possession. Mastery is not the product of struggle, but of precision, the alignment of observation, will, and action into a coherent, unassailable force. In this framework, the toxic are neither adversaries nor enigmas. They are components within a landscape of influence. Engagement is navigated with calm. Observation is sharpened by detachment. Boundaries are maintained with absolute consistency, and autonomy is defended through disciplined action. Every law reinforces the next, creating a continuum of strategic mastery. The toxic lose their capacity to destabilize. The strategist emerges unshaken, unbreached, and sovereign in the arena of human interaction. The mind that has internalized these principles moves through the world with a rhythm invisible to the untrained eye. Every interaction, every exchange, every word is measured not for immediate satisfaction, but for long-term positioning. The toxic may seek to provoke, to unsettle, to redirect focus, yet the strategist is already ahead, having anticipated the currents before they surface. There is no reaction, only deliberate alignment, a command over circumstance that is subtle, unyielding, and absolute. Control is exercised through the quiet assertion of self-possession. Presence alone, unwavering and composed, communicates authority without confrontation. The toxic rely on visible weakness, hesitation, or uncertainty to assert influence. Remove these openings, and their methods lose effectiveness. The strategist does not engage in the spectacle of provocation. Instead, they operate in the architecture beneath it, guiding outcomes without visible struggle, shaping the flow of interaction while others expend energy in vain. Every boundary reinforced is an act of sovereignty. To permit intrusion even once is to invite repetition. Consistency, not severity, is the instrument that commands respect. The toxic test endlessly, probing for hesitation, for the trace of doubt that can be exploited. By holding the line without hesitation, the strategist communicates that manipulation meets no purchase, that intrusion meets no compromise, and that authority exists independently of provocation. Detachment is the lens through which perception becomes clarity. The toxic rely on emotional entanglement, on reactions that expose vulnerability, on impulses that cloud judgment. By remaining detached, the strategist transforms potential chaos into intelligence, converting every act of manipulation into data for measured action. The ability to observe without response is not indifference. It is mastery of self and circumstance, a shield against intrusion, and a precondition for decisive engagement. Strategic orchestration extends beyond the immediate encounter. Every move, every pause, every choice is evaluated in the context of broader influence. Engagement is not reactionary, it is architecture. Silence can communicate control, words can reinforce position, and action can realign dynamics without confrontation. Influence is sustained, not through force, but through deliberate calibration, each step measured, each decision positioned to preserve autonomy and assert unshakable presence. Observation of networks and relationships amplifies mastery. Toxicity rarely exists in isolation. It interacts with systems, hierarchies, and dependencies. Understanding these connections allows the strategist to contain disruption without direct struggle, to leverage insight without confrontation, and to maintain authority over the environment, even when the immediate threat is subtle or hidden. Awareness extends influence, and perception becomes the vehicle of unassailable control. Autonomy is continuously reinforced. Every decision, every allocation of attention, every assessment of influence is calibrated to ensure the locus of control remains unbreached. The toxic cannot dictate action, thought, or perception. They encounter a force field of deliberate choice and disciplined focus. Influence is neutralized not by opposition, but by refusal to yield. By remaining sovereign, the strategist converts potential vulnerability into sustained command. Internalized command is the culmination of all effort. Authority is cultivated internally. Clarity is maintained through disciplined observation. Influence manifests externally as a natural consequence of self-possession. The toxic are constrained not by confrontation, but by the quiet rigor of principle, the consistency of calibrated action, and the alignment of perception with will. Mastery is not a momentary victory. It is an enduring state, sustained through continuous vigilance and deliberate orchestration. Through recognition, internal control, boundaries, detachment, strategic orchestration, perception of dynamics, preservation of autonomy, and internalized command, the toxic lose their capacity to disrupt, manipulate, or dominate. They remain as actors in a system over which the strategist maintains unassailable authority. Engagement is navigated with precision, presence remains impenetrable, and influence is exercised without visible struggle. The toxic are neutralized, not through confrontation, but through mastery, the mastery of self, of circumstance, and of the architecture of human interaction itself. Influence, once earned, is maintained through vigilance, for even the slightest lapse invites recalibration by those who seek to destabilize. The toxic do not pause. They adapt, they probe, they shift with subtlety. To remain unassailable requires a continuous refinement of perception, a relentless attention to the forces that surround you. One must anticipate the unseen, calculate the probable, and act with the inevitability of fate itself. The strategist does not merely respond, they project, they shape, they command the trajectory of engagement before it reaches the stage of action. The most insidious threats are often invisible, operating in the silences between words, in the absences of attention, in the subtle manipulations of expectation. The toxic wield these as instruments of power, yet the prepared mind discerns them with a precision born of discipline. Awareness transforms ambiguity into clarity. Calculation converts disruption into advantage. There is no need for display, for argument, or for indignation. The subtle assertion of control is sufficient, for it leaves no opening, no misstep, and no leverage for intrusion. Loyalty itself must be observed as terrain, measured and mapped. The toxic exploit divided attention, fractured alliances, and inconsistent commitment. By cultivating consistency in one's own conduct, by aligning action with principle, the strategist renders deception ineffective. Predictability and integrity is not weakness, it is armor. The toxic may attempt to sway opinion, redirect allegiance, or manipulate trust, yet they confront a fortress of intentionality that cannot be breached by charm, pressure, or duplicity. Silence is a weapon as potent as action. Words, when uncalibrated, provide openings for manipulation. By limiting speech to what is necessary, by revealing only that which serves strategy, one retains control over perception. The toxic cannot exploit what is not given. They cannot bend what is immovable. Every disclosure, every statement, every acknowledgement is weighed against long-term consequence, and every silence is deliberate, a statement of command in absence of confrontation. Observation of motive is crucial. The toxic operate under imperatives often hidden even from themselves: envy, ambition, insecurity, desire for control. To anticipate action is to understand these imperatives without attachment, to predict behavior not from emotion, but from principle. One learns to perceive the rhythm of compulsion, to calculate the likely move before it emerges, and to act in alignment with advantage rather than reaction. In this perception lies mastery, for the toxic are constrained by the very nature of their own drives. Detachment extends beyond emotion to circumstance. External chaos, shifting alliances, and manipulative pressures are navigated not with haste, but with measured action. The strategist does not seek to dominate every variable, but to maintain sovereignty over what matters: attention, decision, and presence. By controlling these, one renders even the most complex web of toxicity irrelevant, for influence requires opportunity, and opportunity is denied when the mind is disciplined, the will is firm, and the strategy is clear. The accumulation of advantage is often invisible, occurring in decisions deferred, boundaries maintained, and presence controlled. There is no need for spectacle. The toxic will exhaust themselves against the immovable, the indifferent, the disciplined. Every test they administer, every subtle probe they deploy, is absorbed, analyzed, and transformed into insight rather than disruption. The strategist's power is reinforced not by confrontation, but by persistence, consistency, and deliberate orchestration of engagement over time. Power resides not only in action, but in anticipation. To navigate toxic influence is to foresee the shifts, the pressures, the compulsions that will emerge, and to position oneself so that consequence follows naturally from principle. The toxic act within constraint of their own drives. The strategist acts within the constraint of deliberate design. Influence is exercised not in reaction to manipulation, but in alignment with long-term advantage, and control is maintained not through aggression, but through the invisible architecture of foresight, discipline, and consistency. The mastery of interaction with toxic forces is therefore an exercise in architecture, precision, and self-command. Each law, each principle, each calibration builds upon the last. Perception informs action, detachment preserves clarity, Boundaries assert authority, anticipation guides engagement, and internalized command secures autonomy. The toxic are neutralized not through confrontation, not through rhetoric, but through the disciplined orchestration of every element of engagement, the unwavering fortification of mind, and the relentless application of strategy. The strategist understands that influence is rarely static. It shifts with context, with attention, with the subtle motions of those around you. Toxicity operates not in isolation but through interaction, exploiting misalignment, hesitation, or distraction. To remain sovereign, one must treat every engagement as a system of forces, each word, glance, and decision positioned to maintain equilibrium. The toxic may attempt to unsettle, yet equilibrium cannot be disturbed when rooted in self-possession and clarity of intent. Observation extends beyond the immediate actor. Every toxic presence is situated within a network of expectation, perception, and interdependence. The strategist reads the architecture of these connections, perceives leverage before it is applied, and acts in alignment with advantage rather than impulse. Influence is exercised by shaping the field itself, by adjusting one's position relative to currents unseen, and by creating conditions in which disruption cannot take hold. The toxic may move with subtlety, but the strategist moves with foresight, invisible yet omnipresent, shaping outcomes before they emerge. Patience becomes a tool of control. Toxicity relies on impatience, on the compulsion to provoke, on the need for immediate response. By remaining deliberate, by extending time as a resource, the strategist converts urgency into clarity. Reactions are measured, consequences anticipated, and openings denied. Time itself becomes an ally, for the persistent calm of the disciplined mind erodes manipulation, exposes compulsion, and turns pressure into insight rather than disruption. The preservation of autonomy requires constant vigilance. Every attempt to influence, to manipulate, to distract, or to redirect must be evaluated against the principle of self-sovereignty. Control is maintained when every choice, every allocation of attention, and every engagement is deliberate rather than reflexive. The toxic cannot operate effectively when the locus of authority remains internal, unbreached, and unyielding. Authority is sustained through consistency. The strategist does not oscillate with provocation, does not bend with pressure, does not yield to subtle coercion. Every action, every silence, every reinforcement of boundaries communicates a principle unbroken. The toxic may test endlessly, probing for inconsistency, yet they encounter only precision, immutability, and the inevitability of consequence. Influence is thus preserved without confrontation, and the field of engagement is controlled by design rather than dispute. The mind of the strategist integrates every observation into a continuum of mastery. Patterns of behavior, compulsions of manipulation, and drives of envy or ambition are perceived, analyzed, and anticipated. Interaction becomes a choreography of advantage. Actions are precise, reactions calculated, and opportunity converted into leverage. Toxicity is absorbed as data rather than disruption, compulsion rather than chaos. And in this integration lies the unassailable command of circumstance. Even absence is deliberate. Withdrawal from engagement is not surrender but positioning. To disengage gracefully denies the toxic the energy they seek, exposes the dependence they hope to exploit, and reasserts the independence of the strategist. Detachment, applied with intention, communicates authority, preserves clarity, and enforces consequence without confrontation. Every layer of observation, boundary, detachment, and strategy reinforces the next. The toxic, operating through instinct and compulsion, confront a mind that is disciplined, a will that is deliberate, and a presence that is absolute. Each law, each principle, each calibration of action converts potential chaos into ordered engagement, disruption into opportunity, and manipulation into insight. Sovereignty is thus maintained not through force, but through mastery, the mastery of perception, intention, and deliberate action. To anticipate action is to understand these imperatives without attachment, to predict behavior not from emotion, but from principle. One learns to perceive the rhythm of compulsion, to calculate the likely move before it emerges, and to act in alignment with advantage rather than reaction. In this perception lies mastery, for the toxic are constrained by the very nature of their own drives. Detachment extends beyond emotion to circumstance. The mastery of engagement with toxicity is neither incidental nor occasional. It is continuous, deliberate, and absolute. The strategist does not wait for provocation. They anticipate it. Every gesture, every word, every calculated pause is positioned within a lattice of influence that the toxic cannot penetrate. To be unshakable is not merely to endure, but to convert every attempted disruption into insight, every subtle provocation into clarity. Their methods, honed by instinct and compulsion, encounter a mind fortified by foresight, discipline, and unyielding presence. Observation becomes a discipline of the highest order. The toxic act through repetition, compulsion, and subtle manipulation, yet every motion is a map for the attentive mind. The strategist decodes these patterns, transforming what others experience as annoyance or irritation into intelligence. Every slight, every attempt at provocation, every diversion is absorbed without loss, measured, and positioned for potential advantage. There is no need for confrontation, no necessity for anger, no justification in retaliation. Mastery exists in the understanding that power is preserved through control of self and circumstance, not through struggle. The toxic rely upon the permeability of attention and the susceptibility of perception. They create distraction, inject confusion, and exploit hesitation. Yet the disciplined mind converts distraction into opportunity, confusion into assessment, and hesitation into deliberate consideration. The strategist perceives every invisible current, every hidden tension, and every subtle shift in intent. They move not reactively, but as one who shapes the field itself, whose command is evident not through dominance, but through the inevitability of their foresight. The arena of human interaction is thus navigated not by reaction, nor by argument, nor by appeal to conscience, but by the architecture of discipline, foresight, and internalized command. Toxicity loses its potency against the unyielding mind, for every attempt at influence is anticipated, every maneuver accounted for, and every compulsion neutralized. In this relentless alignment of self, environment, and strategy, mastery is absolute, influence unassailable, and sovereignty sustained. Enforcement is silent yet absolute. Violation is not tolerated, not because of anger, but because principle itself demands preservation. Detachment is the lens through which clarity is achieved. The toxic depend upon entanglement, upon reaction, upon the eruption of ungoverned emotion. By remaining detached, the strategist observes fully, responds with precision, and maintains control over attention, intention, and action. Emotional neutrality does not imply indifference. It signifies command. Boundaries are the architecture of sovereignty. They are set not as suggestion, nor as temporary protection, but as permanent delineations of influence. They define the space in which interaction occurs and communicate that intrusion carries consequence. The toxic will test these boundaries, probe for weakness, and attempt subtle encroachments, but consistency transforms them into walls of authority rather than fences of fragility. Engagement becomes a design rather than a contest. Actions reinforce structure, silences preserve equilibrium, and decisions accumulate advantage. Through this orchestration, influence is maintained without confrontation, control without conflict. Observation of relational dynamics is essential. Toxicity rarely functions alone. It thrives in networks, hierarchies, and interdependencies. The strategist perceives these connections, anticipates movement, and positions themselves to neutralize potential disruption. By understanding not only the individual but the system in which they operate, the strategist converts networks of influence into tools of containment. Control is exerted through presence, foresight, and consistency, rendering attempts at manipulation futile before they fully manifest. Autonomy is preserved through continual vigilance. Every decision, allocation of attention, and judgment is measured to ensure that control remains internal. The locus of authority cannot be surrendered even in subtle increments. Influence is neutralized when decision-making remains sovereign. The toxic are constrained not by confrontation, but by the unassailable preservation of autonomy. Presence, clarity, and self-possession deny them access to the levers they rely upon. Internalized command is the culmination of mastery. Authority is cultivated within and expressed through disciplined perception and deliberate action. The toxic confront not an adversary to defeat, but a mind that cannot be unsettled. Consistency in principle, inevitability in consequence, and precision in orchestration constitute an invisible fortress around which influence cannot penetrate. Mastery is not a display of force, but a continuous alignment of self, circumstance, and action, an architecture of control in which disruption cannot thrive. Silence, patience, and timing are instruments as powerful as action. The toxic seek urgency, reaction, and visible disturbance. By denying these openings, the strategist transforms the energy of manipulation into information, allowing insight to accumulate without expenditure of force. Each pause, each delayed response, each calculated omission is a measure of authority, an assertion of presence, and a demonstration that manipulation carries no purchase. The field of engagement is controlled, the currents of influence directed, and every potential disturbance absorbed and neutralized. Even absence functions as strategy. Withdrawal is not surrender, it is positioning. By disengaging gracefully, the strategist removes fuel from the fires the toxic attempt to ignite. Dependence is exposed, weakness is revealed, and autonomy is reinforced. Engagement is reserved for moments when it serves long-term positioning, and non-engagement itself communicates authority, control, and strategic superiority. The culmination of these principles produces an environment in which toxicity is neutralized without conflict. Every law observation, internal control, boundaries, detachment, strategic orchestration, perception of networks, autonomy, internalized command operates in continuous alignment. The toxic find their capacity for disruption diminished. The strategist preserves mind, will, and influence. Mastery is maintained through vigilance, discipline, and deliberate calibration. Control is neither contested nor flaunted. It exists as the inevitable consequence of foresight, principle, and unshakable presence. Through this relentless architecture, the toxic are constrained not by dominance, not by confrontation, not by overt struggle, but by the continuous application of strategic mastery. Every interaction reinforces control, every engagement preserves autonomy, and every maneuver strengthens command. Influence is exercised without spectacle, authority is maintained without ostentation, and sovereignty persists against compulsion, manipulation, and deceit. The unshakable mind moves through the currents of human ambition with inevitability, and the toxic, operating only through their own drives, find themselves contained, observed, and rendered ineffective by design rather than force. And so, the mastery over toxicity is not a momentary triumph, nor a victory shouted across the battlefield of human intrigue. It is the quiet assertion of command, the unyielding discipline of mind, the sovereignty of presence that no manipulation can breach. Those who seek to unsettle, to provoke, to manipulate, encounter only calculation, patience, and the inevitability of consequence. Their schemes, born of compulsion and instinct, falter against deliberate observation and unshakable self-possession. The strategist moves through life as one walks a carefully mapped terrain, each step precise, each choice deliberate, each engagement measured. Influence is maintained not by dominance or spectacle, but by the architecture of foresight and principle. Boundaries are enforced without anger, detachment is maintained without indifference, and autonomy is preserved without struggle. Every act of manipulation, every subtle provocation, every attempt to sow chaos becomes a mirror, reflecting the consistency, clarity, and control of the unassailable mind. In the end, toxicity is neutralized not through confrontation, nor argument, nor appeal to morality, but through mastery. Mastery of perception, mastery of self, and mastery of circumstance. The toxic remain as shadows moving through a landscape they cannot shape, constrained by the invisible walls of strategy, foresight, and relentless discipline. Their power exists only in the absence of clarity. Once the strategist asserts command, it evaporates. The final truth is simple yet absolute. Influence is earned through internal sovereignty, preserved through discipline, and exercised through deliberate orchestration. Those who cannot sway the unshaken mind are powerless. Control is not a gift, nor a struggle. It is the quiet, relentless alignment of thought, intention, and action. The toxic are left behind, their currents of manipulation impotent, their attempts at destabilization null. What remains is clarity, presence, and the unassailable authority of a mind that refuses to bend. And in that calm, calculated dominion, one discovers the only law that truly governs all human interaction, mastery, and the enduring freedom it confers.